The morning of departure arrived wrapped in a silence that felt like held breath. Gray light bled across the eastern mountains, but the forest remained stubbornly dark, keeping its secrets. Lyra stood at the manor's massive front doors, dressed in practical gear Celine had provided. Thermal layers, sturdy boots, a pack containing minimal supplies. She looked both determined and terribly small against the stone facade. Celine adjusted the strap on Lyra's pack, her kind face lined with worry. "Remember what I taught you. The mental shield isn't a wall. It's a filter. Let the forest's whispers flow through you without settling. If they take root, they grow. And if I hear Anya's voice—" Celine's hands stilled. She met Lyra's eyes, her expression grave. "That is what he fears most, that the glen will make you a vessel for his past. You must hold fiercely to your own truth. You are Lyra Bishop, graphic designer, terrible decision-maker, survivor, not her echo." Kalen emerged from the house, his storm-gray eyes assessing the overcast sky. "He's waiting at the tree line, the eastern path. He won't come to the house to get you." "Of course not," Lyra said. "That would imply willingness." Kalen smiled faintly. "You're learning our alpha. Remember what I told you. Don't push toward affection. But also, don't let him freeze you out completely. The bond needs some warmth to survive the cold you're walking into." He handed her a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. "Moon-blessed salt. For the whispering spirits. Toss a pinch if they get too personal. It won't hurt them, but it'll interrupt their thoughts." Lyra took it, her fingers brushing Kalen's. A brief, shocking flash of his memory hit her through the casual contact. Caius, years younger, covered in blood that wasn't his, kneeling in the snow with empty eyes. The night he became alpha. She staggered back, blinking. Kalen's eyes widened. "The bond is making you more receptive to all pack connections," he said. "Be careful with touch." "Noted," Lyra breathed, steadying herself. She turned toward the eastern tree line. There, at the edge where the manicured grounds gave way to wild forest, Caius stood waiting. He was dressed for hard travel, black thermal layers, weapons strapped to his body that looked both modern and ancient. He watched her approach without expression, but the bond between them was a live wire, humming with his grim determination, and something else, a reluctant respect since the night of the feral wolf. As she reached him, he wordlessly took her pack, checked its weight and balance with efficient hands, then handed it back. "You'll carry your own weight," he said, his voice like gravel. "If you fall behind, I won't wait." "I didn't expect you to." He studied her face for a moment, as if looking for signs of weakness or regret. Finding none, he gave a single, curt nod. "The whispering wood is not like the forest around Frosthaven. It remembers. It feeds on memory and regret. Keep your shield tight, speak only when necessary, and don't touch anything that glows." He turned and stepped into the forest. Lyra took one last look back at the manor. Celine and Kalen stood together on the steps, watching. They didn't wave. This wasn't a journey for farewells. She followed Caius into the trees. The temperature dropped immediately. The light changed. It wasn't just shade. It was as if they'd stepped through a membrane into a different world. Through the connection, Lyra felt Caius's senses expanding, his hearing stretching for miles, his smell parsing thousands of scents, decay, animal fear, old magic, and beneath it all, the sweet rotten scent of deep sorrow. He was letting her feel it, a warning, not a gift. Kalen said the most wounded animal in these woods was the alpha who'd locked me in his house, Lyra thought, her boots crunching on frost-rimed leaves. Today, that wounded animal was leading me directly to the site of his greatest pain, and the bond between us was becoming less of a chain and more of an open wound we both carried. "Quiet your thoughts," Caius said without looking back. "The wood is listening." They walked. The forest grew stranger with each mile. Trees twisted into agonized shapes, moss hung like funeral veils, and the silence. It wasn't empty. It was full, heavy with unsaid things. After an hour, they reached a creek. The water ran clear over stones, but beneath the surface, faces seemed to form and dissolve in the current. Not human faces, but impressions of grief, moments of loss preserved like insects in amber. Caius stopped, staring at the water. Lyra felt a spike of pain through the bond, sharp, fresh, 70 years old. "What do you see?" she asked. "The day I buried my parents," he said, his voice tight. "I was 12. The water shows what it thinks will hurt me most." He turned his face away, but not before Lyra saw the muscle jumping in his jaw. "Don't look directly at the water," he instructed. "Step where I step." He crossed via stones that didn't quite break the surface. Lyra followed. As she reached the midpoint, her own face looked back at her from the water. Not her reflection, but her as a child, holding a broken picture frame, crying alone in an empty apartment. A memory she'd sealed away. She gasped, stumbling. Caius's hand shot out, catching her elbow. His touch was electric, and for a second, their memories overlapped in the bond. Her childhood loneliness crashed against his youthful grief, creating a feedback loop of shared pain. "Shield," he gritted out, his own voice strained. "Now!" She focused, rebuilding the mental filter Selene had taught her. The water face dissolved. They made it to the other side, but the contact lingered, his hand on her arm, her pain in his mind. He released her as if burned. "That's how it works," he said, not meeting her eyes. "It finds your wounds and presses. The deeper we go, the harder it presses." He looked at her then, and for the first time, there was no anger in his golden eyes, just grim understanding. "We should turn back," he said. "You're not ready for what's at the center." Lyra shook her head. "If I'm not ready now, I never will be. And we both need this bond broken." He held her gaze for a long moment, then turned back to the path. "Then we keep moving, and you don't touch me again." They continued deeper. The whispers began just as the last gray light of afternoon started to fail. At first, they were just sounds, rustles that might be leaves, sighs that could be wind, but soon they formed words, fragments of conversations, arguments, last words. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean. If you loved me, you'd understand. Don't leave me here alone." Caius's pace didn't change, but Lyra felt him hardening his mental shields, building fortresses around his mind. She tried to do the same, but she was an amateur at this, and the whispers found cracks. One voice rose above the others, female, young, laughing. "Caius, come on! The moon won't wait for your brooding." Caius froze, actually stopped moving. His back went rigid. Lyra knew without asking. "Anya." The voice came again, closer now, from the left where the trees grew thick and dark. "My fierce, serious alpha, always carrying the world. Let me carry some of it with you." "Not real," Caius whispered, not to Lyra, but to himself. Memory echo. Not real. But he was trembling. Lyra could feel it through the bond, a seismic shaking in the foundation of him. The voice moved to their right now, playful, teasing. "You know, for a man who commands wolves, you're terribly afraid of happiness." Caius closed his eyes, his hands fisted at his sides. "Caius," Lyra said softly. "It's not her." "I know what it is," he said, his eyes still closed. "But knowing doesn't stop the hearing." A figure stepped from between the trees ahead, not fully formed, a shimmer of light and memory, like a ghost projected on mist. A young woman with wild dark hair and eyes that even in memory form gleamed with intelligence and warmth. Anya. She smiled directly at Caius. "You came back," the echo whispered, its voice now inside their minds, bypassing ears. "I knew you would. You always come back to where it hurts most." Caius made a sound like a wounded animal. The bond flooded with such profound, desolate grief that Lyra's knees nearly buckled. The mournful windsong grew louder, pulling them forward like a current. The trees here were different, ancient, towering sentinels with bark like silvered armor. They stood in a wide circle, creating a natural cathedral in the forest. This was the heartwood. In the center of the clearing, the ground was covered not in moss or leaves, but in a thick, soft carpet of luminous blue fungi that pulsed gently with their own light. It illuminated the space with an ethereal underwater glow. The whispers of the forest didn't penetrate here. The air was still and reverent, heavy with old magic. Caius slowed to a halt at the edge of the fungal circle, his shoulders finally dropping a fraction from their defensive hike. "We camp here. The glen's threshold is just beyond those trees." He nodded toward the far side of the clearing, where two particularly massive pines leaned toward each other, forming a ragged archway. Through it, Lyra could see only deepening shadows and a colder, grayer light. "It's quiet," she whispered, the normal sound of her voice feeling like a trespass. "The heartwood remembers a time before the shattering," Caius said, his voice equally low. "It holds the memory of wholeness. The blight hounds and the whispers, they cannot enter this space. It is the only truly safe ground in the Whispering Wood." He shrugged off his pack with a wince. The wounds from the hounds had stopped bleeding, but the tears in his thermal shirt revealed angry red marks that were healing slower than usual. The black ichor seemed to have a poisoning effect. "You're hurt," Lyra said, stepping closer. "It's nothing. The blight venom slows regeneration. It'll pass by morning." He began to gather dry wood from the perimeter of the clearing, careful not to touch the glowing fungi. Lyra stood uncertainly for a moment, then set her own pack down. The silence was a physical relief after the hours of psychic noise. She helped him gather wood, their movements falling into a wordless, awkward rhythm. Soon, a small, crackling fire pushed back the blue glow, creating a dome of warm, flickering light. They sat on opposite sides of the fire. Caius produced rations, dried meat, hard cheese, a water skin. He handed her share across the flames. They ate in silence, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. The frantic edge was gone, replaced by a weary, shared reality. Lyra could feel the bond like a settled thing now, a steady hum in her veins. She could feel his physical pain as a dull throb in her own shoulder and leg. She could feel his exhaustion, a weight in her own bones, but she could also feel his vigilance, his awareness of every sound in the forest beyond the circle, his alpha's mind constantly mapping threats. It should have been overwhelming. Instead, it was starting to feel familiar. "Why does this place remember wholeness?" she asked, finally breaking the silence. Caius stared into the fire, his face etched in gold and shadow. "This is where the challenge rituals were once held. For centuries, before Varek corrupted everything. Packs would gather here under the full moon. Challenges were issued, rank was contested, bonds were blessed. It was a place of law, of order." His jaw tightened. Varek moved the ritual ground to the glen for his own purposes. He wanted a place already soaked in the old magics of death and transformation. He perverted it. And when I killed him here, the glen shattered. And this place, he looked around at the circle of trees, went to sleep, remembering what it used to be. Lyra followed his gaze. She could almost imagine it, the clearing full of wolves in both forms, moonlight streaming down, the air crackling with power and tradition, a proud, sacred history. Then her eyes drifted to the dark archway leading to the glen, the place where that history had ended in blood and betrayal. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "we go through there." "We go through there," he confirmed. His golden eyes lifted to hers across the fire. "The tear of the moon will be at the very center, where the ritual stone lies, where Anya—" He trailed off, but the bond completed the sentence with a surge of hollow ache. "Will it be difficult to pick?" she asked, focusing on the practical, fearing the emotional. "The flower isn't the challenge," he said, his voice grim. "The glen is. It will use everything it has against us. My memories, your fears, our connection. It will try to convince us that the bond is a curse worth dying to escape, or a treasure worth killing to keep. It deals in extremes." He poked the fire with a stick, sending up a shower of sparks. "You should sleep. I'll keep watch. You're wounded and exhausted, Lyra protested. Let me take a watch. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his mouth. You, who fell asleep at a desk in a locked room? You'll keep watch? I'm harder to surprise now, she said, tapping her temple. I have a direct line to your hypervigilance. The smile faded, but his expression remained softer than she'd ever seen it. The bond isn't a surveillance system, Lyra, and you need to learn to rest within it or you'll never truly sleep again. He leaned back against his pack. Sleep. That's an order from your alpha. The old arrogance was there, but it was tempered, worn. She wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her, a wave of fatigue crashing over her. The adrenaline of the journey and the fight was gone. She wrapped herself in her thermal blanket, lying on the soft, glowing fungi. It was strangely warm, humming with a gentle energy that soothed her aching muscles. She watched Caius through half-lidded eyes. He sat perfectly still, staring into the flames, his profile stern and beautiful in the firelight. The bond hummed between them, a low, steady frequency. For the first time, it didn't feel like a chain or a trap. In this quiet, sacred circle, with danger held at bay just beyond the trees, it felt like a thread, a connection. She fell asleep not to silence, but to the rhythm of his breathing and the quiet, watchful peace of his mind. She dreamed, but it wasn't her dream. It was his. She stood in the Frosthaven Manor, but it was brighter, warmer. Laughter echoed from the kitchen. A younger Caius, his face less lined with grief but no less intense, was being scolded by a woman with silvery braids, Celine, decades younger. You can't just command a pie to bake itself, Alpha, Celine was saying, her hands covered in flour. It takes patience. I have patience for strategy, for patrols, not for pastry, young Caius grumbled, but there was a light in his golden eyes she'd never seen before, a playful light. Your mate will be horrified by your domestic helplessness. My mate, he said, and the word was filled with such awe and possession it made Lyra's heart ache. Can command the respect of alphas and the obedience of storms. I think she'll forgive me a burnt crust. The back door opened and Anya walked in, her cheeks flushed from the cold, her dark hair escaping its braid. She was vibrant, alive, her energy filling the room. She went straight to Caius, not with a submissive gesture, but wrapping her arms around his neck and kissing him soundly, ignoring Celine's amused chuckle. The southern border is secure, Anya said against his lips, and I'm starving. Is that pie I smell? Disaster in a dish, Caius murmured, his forehead resting against hers. My favorite kind. The love between them was a tangible force, a bright, fierce thing that made the very air sparkle. Lyra watched, a ghost in the memory, feeling the echo of that joy through the bond. It was immediately followed by the crushing weight of knowing how it ended. The scene shifted, the same kitchen, but darker, the air thick with tension. Caius and Anya were speaking in low, urgent voices. Varek is weakening the pack's spirit, Caius. He trades with dark things. The witches of the Whispering Wood are not our allies. I know, but a direct challenge. Anya, the risk. She took his face in her hands. You are the strength of this pack, not him. The risk is in waiting. He will sacrifice our people to his greed for power. Her eyes glowed with determination. We do it on the challenge moon. Together. He captured her hands, brought them to his lips. Together, he vowed. Then the dream memory twisted, turning murky and dark. They were in the glen, the crimson sickle moon overhead, not the ritual stone, but the edge of the trees. Anya was shaking him. Caius, listen to me. Something's wrong. The air tastes of lies. I can't see you clearly. Her eyes were wide with confusion, with fear. He held her shoulders. It's the moon's power, the challenge magic. Stay focused. On me. Only on me. But her gaze slid past him, toward the ritual ground where Varek stood, a triumphant smirk on his face. I see him. I see you. I can't tell which is which. Anya, look at me. But the memory shattered into fragments, a roar, a flash of claws, a sickening impact, the feel of her body falling, the sound of her head striking stone, the smell of blood and iron, her eyes clearing at the last second, the smile, the forgiveness, and then the scream. Not hers, his, a sound that tore the world in two. Lyra woke with a gasp, tears streaming down her face. The fire had burned low. Across from her, Caius was staring at her, his own face a mask of stark horror in the dim blue light. "You saw," he said, his voice a raw scrape. "I dreamed. I felt." She could still feel the echo of his world-ending scream in her bones. "The bond," he said, closing his eyes. "In deep sleep, in a place this saturated with memory. Defenses drop. I'm sorry. You should never have had to see that." He wasn't angry. He was ashamed. Lyra sat up, wiping her face. "I saw the good too," she whispered. "The pie, the laughter. How much you loved her." He opened his eyes. The pain in them was bottomless. "Love isn't a shield, Lyra. It's a target. The bigger it is, the easier it is to hit." "Or," she said, the words coming from a place of instinct she didn't fully understand, "it's the thing that makes you worth hitting in the first place. Maybe Varric didn't just see your strength. Maybe he saw your love for her and knew it was the only thing that could make you vulnerable." He stared at her, utterly still. Her words hung in the air between them, a truth he had lived but never articulated. Before he could respond, a new sound cut through the quiet of the heartwood. It came from the direction of the glen's threshold, not a whisper, a voice, clear, crystalline, and dripping with malicious sweetness. "You brought a new toy to our grieving place, Caius dear. How progressive." It was a voice Lyra had never heard, yet she knew it instantly from Kaelin's story. A voice that spoke of rotten honey and broken glass. Varric's witch. And she was not a memory. The echo of Anya shimmered, a memory given form by the forest's cruel magic. She took a step toward them, and the undergrowth didn't rustle. She left no footprints in the frost. Caius stood paralyzed, a statue of grief. Lyra could feel the fracture inside him, a fault line running through his soul that this ghost was hammering against. The bond between them vibrated with a frequency that felt like shattering glass. "You look tired, my love," Anya's echo whispered, its head tilting with familiar affection, still carrying it all alone. "Don't," Caius breathed, the word torn from him. "Don't use her voice." "But it is my voice. A piece of me left here, in the place where I left everything else." The echo's smile turned sorrowful. "You left me here too, Caius. For 70 years. Why did you never come back to visit?" The pain that lanced through the bond was so acute Lyra gasped, her hand flying to her own chest. It was a guilt so profound it had its own gravity, pulling everything toward a dark center. "Because it's a tomb," Caius gritted out, his eyes still screwed shut. "And I am the one who built it." Lyra couldn't stand it. The echo wasn't real, but the agony it was provoking in Caius was, and his agony was becoming hers, a feedback loop that threatened to drown them both. She remembered the bundle in her pocket. She stepped forward, placing herself slightly between Caius and the shimmering memory. She fumbled with the cloth, her fingers numb with cold and shared emotion. "What's this?" the echo said, its focus shifting to Lyra for the first time. Its eyes, brilliant, intelligent, and utterly hollow, scanned her. Oh, I see. The moon's little joke. A human." "Leave him alone," Lyra said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Or what? You'll defend him?" The echo laughed, a sound like tinkling bells and breaking ice. "You're a strand of spider silk tied to a mountain. When the storm comes, you'll snap." He knows it. That's why he hates the bond. Not because of me, because of you. Because you are fragile, and your breaking will break him all over again. The truth of it, or a twisted version of truth, hit Lyas like a physical blow. She saw Caius flinch. Lyra didn't answer. She pinched a generous amount of the moon-blessed salt between her fingers and threw it into the air between them. It didn't hit the echo. It passed through the shimmering form like smoke. But the effect was instant. The salt sparkled in the dim light, and where each granule landed on the forest floor, a tiny, pure silver light flared. The echo's image distorted, flickering like a bad signal. Its mouth opened in a soundless cry. The whispered words in their minds fragmented into nonsense, then static. "It disrupts the memory resonance," Caius said, his voice raw but present. He'd opened his eyes. "It doesn't destroy it, just confuses it." The echo of Anya reformed a few feet away, but its edges were blurrier, its expression less focused, more sorrowful than cruel. "Always. The hard way." It whispered, the words fading in and out. "Could have remembered the joy. Instead, you only fertilize the grief." Then it dissolved, not into nothing, but into the very air, becoming one more whisper among the thousands. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Caius didn't move for a full minute, his breathing ragged. Lyra watched the line of his back, the tension in his shoulders. The bond hummed with a residual ache, but the sharp stabbing pain had receded. "Thank you," he said, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. He didn't turn around. "You told me not to touch anything that glows," she said, trying to lighten the unbearable weight. "You didn't say anything about throwing salt at ghosts." A shuddering breath escaped him. It wasn't a laugh, but it was close. "A loophole. I'll have to be more specific." He finally turned. His golden eyes were haunted, the shadows beneath them deeper. But he looked at her, really looked at her, and there was no anger in his gaze, just exhaustion and a dazed kind of gratitude. "What she said," Lyra began cautiously, "about me being fragile, about my breaking you, is that—" "It's what the forest wants you to believe," he interrupted, his voice firming. "It takes a truth. The bond is a vulnerability and sharpens it into a weapon. My fear is not your burden to carry." It was the first remotely kind thing he'd ever said to her. It disarmed her completely. "We should keep moving," he continued, the alpha mask sliding back into place, though it was cracked now. "We need to make the heartwood by nightfall. The center of the wood is volatile after dark." "What's in the heartwood?" "The Glen's threshold, and the only safe place to camp. Safe being a relative term." He set off again, and Lyra followed. The encounter had changed something. The air between them was different. The bond still hummed with his sorrow, but it was quieter now, as if she had helped him carry a small piece of it, and in doing so proved she wouldn't immediately snap under the weight. The forest grew denser, darker. The twisted trees began to show faces in their bark, frozen expressions of anguish, mouths open in silent screams. Lyra kept her eyes on Caius's back, using him as an anchor. After another hour of silent trekking, he stopped abruptly, holding up a fist. Lyra froze. He tilted his head, listening to something she couldn't hear. His nostrils flared. "We're being followed," he murmured, his voice barely a breath. "Not by a memory, by flesh." Lyra's heart stuttered. "The feral wolf's pack?" "No, something older." His eyes glowed faintly in the gloom. "Stay behind me. Do not run unless I say." A low, chittering sound echoed through the trees, coming from all around them. It wasn't a wolf's growl. It was the sound of dry leaves scraping together, of claws on stone. From the shadows between the gnarled oaks, shapes detached themselves. They were canine, but wrong. Their fur was matted with moss and fungus, their eyes milky white and blind. They moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, as if their bones didn't quite fit together. 6 of them. They fanned out in a semicircle, blocking the path ahead. "Blight hounds," Caius whispered, a new tension in his voice. "The wood's guardians. They don't hunt for food. They hunt for memory. They'll tear our minds out through our eyes if they can." One of the creatures took a step forward, its head cocking at a sickening angle. It sniffed the air, its milky eyes fixed not on Caius, but on Lyra. It let out a wet, rattling chitter. The sound echoed in Lyra's skull, and suddenly, she wasn't in the forest. She was 9 years old, hiding in a closet, listening to her parents' final vicious argument before the divorce. The memory was so vivid she could smell the dust on the coats. She cried out, stumbling back. The other hound's head snapped toward her. She was a beacon, her unshielded mind glowing like a feast to them. Caius moved, a blur of black and lethal grace. He didn't shift, but his claws were out, elongated and deadly. He met the first hound as it lunged for Lyra, his forearm blocking its jaws with a crunch. He pivoted, throwing the creature into 2 others. "Your shield, Lyra! Now!" he roared, grappling with a hound that had latched onto his leg. She tried, but the invading memory was a hook in her mind. The hound's chittering was pulling it out, unraveling it, feeding on the pain of that forgotten childhood moment. "Anchor," she thought desperately. "Find your anchor." Her hands were cold. The forest floor was hard. Caius was fighting for her. She focused on the feeling of the moon salt bundle still clutched in her numb fist. The rough cloth, the granular texture within. This is real. This is now. The memory of the closet faded, pushed back by present terror. She rebuilt her mental wall, brick by brick. The hound focusing on her let out a frustrated screech. Caius had dispatched 2 of them, their bodies dissolving into piles of rotting leaves and black fungus. But 3 more were on him, and one was circling toward Lyra, its milky eyes now fixed on her chest, on the place where the bond glowed hottest within her. It saw the connection. It wanted to sever it, to feast on the trauma of that severing. "Caius!" she yelled. He ripped the jaws of one hound from his shoulder with a snarl of pain and saw the situation. His eyes met hers. There was no time for strategy, for commands. "Give me your fear." His voice slammed into her mind, not as an invasion, but as an urgent request. All of it. Push it down the bond. Without hesitation, Lyra grabbed the terror coiling in her gut. The fear of the hounds, the fear of the forest, the deeper fear of this bond and what it meant. And she didn't shield it. She shoved it, a torrent of raw, unfiltered emotion, down the connection that bound them. Caius didn't flinch. He absorbed it. His golden eyes ignited with a furious, incandescent light. The pain from his wounds vanished beneath a wave of borrowed adrenaline and fury. He moved faster than before, a tempest of claws and rage. He tore through the remaining hounds. It wasn't a fight, it was an eradication. When the last one dissolved into mulch, he stood panting in the sudden quiet, his clothes torn, blood and black ichor streaking his skin. The borrowed fear from Lyra slowly ebbed from his system, leaving a strange, charged calm in its wake. He turned to her. He was breathing hard, his gaze intense. "You listened," he said. "You asked," she replied, her own breath coming in short gasps. A moment passed between them, there in the corpse-strewn clearing. The bond thrummed with something new, not just shared pain or survival, but the first fragile thread of trust. He had asked. She had given. They had fought, not as alpha and liability, but as 2 parts of a dangerous, living circuit. He nodded once, a decisive gesture. "The heartwood is close. Let's move before their essence attracts something bigger." As they hurried onward, the forest began to change again. The oppressive, twisted trees gave way to taller, straighter pines. The ground softened underfoot with a carpet of deep moss. And the whispers began to coalesce into a single mournful sound, like wind through a vast, empty chamber. It was the sound of the shattered glen, calling them home. The voice slithered through the archway of trees, a physical presence that seemed to stain the clean, quiet air of the heartwood. The glowing fungi around them dimmed, as if recoiling. Caius was on his feet in an instant, a low growl rumbling in his chest. His wounds were forgotten, his posture pure, predatory readiness. He moved to stand between Lyra and the threshold, his body a solid wall of tension. Morwenna! He spat the name like a curse. You were banished. Your bones should be dust in the deep wood. A figure materialized in the archway, not walking, but coalescing from the shadows and gray light of the glen beyond. She was ageless in the way of powerful supernatural things, her face smooth, her eyes ancient and black as pitch. Her hair was the color of dirty snow, hanging in tangled waves around a gown made of what looked like woven moss and shadows. She smiled, and it was a crack in a porcelain mask. Banished by you, dear boy. But some roots grow deeper than a decree. The glen is my home. It always was. You just brought the entertainment. Her dark eyes slid past him, fixing on Lyra with avid curiosity. Oh, but she's interesting. Not a shifter, not a witch, a little blank page, and you've let the moon write all over her. Lyra stood up, her heart hammering. This wasn't a memory echo. This was the real thing, the witch who had twisted perception and caused Anya's death. The source of Caius's living nightmare. Stay behind me, Caius commanded, his voice vibrating with suppressed rage. He always says that. Morwenna sighed, taking a step into the heartwood. The fungi beneath her feet blackened and died where she stepped. He said it to the other one too, and yet she still ended up dead at his feet. History has such a tedious way of repeating itself. Leave, Caius snarled, his claws extending fully. This is your only warning. Or what? You'll kill me? You had your chance 70 years ago. You were so busy rending Varric limb from limb, you only managed to singe my dress before I slipped away. She tilted her head. But I've so enjoyed watching you from the shadows since. The glorious, grieving alpha. A monument to his own failure. And now? This. She gestured vaguely at the space between Caius and Lyra. The moon tries to give you a second chance, and all you can think to do is rip it out by the roots. It's almost poetic. Lyra could feel Caius's control fraying. The witch's words were needles, each one finding a crack in his armor, pouring poison into the old wounds. The bond trembled with his rising fury, a red tide threatening to drown his reason. Don't, Lyra thought at him, pushing the concept down their connection as hard as she could. It wasn't a word, but an impression, a hand on a storm-tossed rail. She wants you to charge. She felt his shock at her mental touch, not the forced invasion of before, but a deliberate, steadying press. He didn't look at her, but his breathing hitched. The red tide of rage ebbed, just a fraction. Morwenna's pitch-black eyes flickered to Lyra, her smile widening. Clever little page, you can read him already. How adorable. But can you read me? The witch's gaze locked with Lyra's. It felt like falling into a well of freezing ink. Images, sensations, promises flooded Lyra's mind, bypassing her fledgling shields with ease. The bond, breaking like a silver thread, and with it, a wonderful, weightless freedom. Caius, turning away from her, his face cold and indifferent, walking into the forest without a backward glance. Herself, whole and alone, driving away from Frosthaven in a working car, the nightmare fading in the rearview mirror. It was a lie. A beautiful, seductive lie. And a part of Lyra, the part that was terrified and tired, wanted to clutch at it. No! Lyra gasped aloud, wrenching her eyes away. She focused on the real sensations, the ache in her muscles from the trek, the scent of pine and cold earth, the steady, angry presence of Caius beside her. That's not real. You trade in illusions. Morwenna's smile vanished. I trade in truth. The truth people are too afraid to want. You want to be free of him. He wants to be free of you. I can make that happen. No dangerous trek to the ritual stone. No plucking tragic flowers. Just a simple snip. She made a scissoring motion with her fingers. My price is trivial. A little memory. One of his, perhaps. The taste of her last kiss. Or one of yours. The feel of your mother's hand. Small change for such a large freedom. Get out of her head! Caius roared, and this time he did take a step forward, silver light gathering around his claws. Or you'll do what? Morwenna sneered, but she took a matching step back toward the threshold. The heartwood's protective magic seemed to make her uncomfortable, leaching the solidity from her form. You need my glen to grow your cure, Caius, and my glen does not give up its treasures to those who scorn it. You come to steal a tear, to open the old wound and steal its jewel? The glen will not allow it. But she grinned again, I could be persuaded to fetch it for you. For my price. We are not making deals with you, Lyra said, finding her voice. It sounded stronger than she felt. We'll get the flower ourselves. You? Morwenna laughed, a sound like breaking branches. You will drown in the sorrow of that place. It will show you his love for her in exquisite detail, and you will see how pale and pathetic your little connection is in comparison. It will break your mind before you take 10 steps past the stone. Then that's our fate to risk, Caius said, his voice dropping into a deadly calm. Leave this circle, Morwenna. Your presence defiles it. The witch's form shimmered with rage. The air grew colder. Very well. Play the hero and the sacrifice. The glen is hungry. It has been starving for 70 years, feeding on the same old grief. It would love something new, something fresh and human. She pointed a long, bony finger at Lyra. It will eat you alive, girl, and it will make him watch, and that will be the final crack that shatters the mighty Alpha of Frosthaven forever. With a final venomous smile, she dissolved backward into the shadows of the archway, becoming one with the glen's gloom. The heartwood was silent again. The blue fungi slowly brightened back to their normal glow, but the peace was gone, shattered. Caius didn't move for a long time, staring at the spot where the witch had been. The bond thrummed with a volatile mix of fury, dread, and a shameful, aching thread of temptation. Morwenna's offer, a clean, quick severance, had resonated in a dark corner of him. I won't let her touch you again, he finally said, the words rough. She wasn't lying about the glen, was she? Lyra asked quietly. About it being hungry for something new. No, he admitted, finally turning to face her. In the eerie blue light, he looked like a statue of some ancient, weary god. The sorrow there is a living thing. It's grown stagnant, feeding on my guilt, on the memory of that night, over and over, a fresh perspective, a new soul to taste. He shook his head. It will come for you, and it will use everything it learns from me through our bond to do it. Lyra hugged herself against the sudden chill. So we're walking into a sentient trap that knows all your weaknesses and is about to learn all of mine. A fair summary. And the only way out is through. He nodded slowly, his golden eyes searching her face. Morwenna gave you an out. A terrible price, but an out. Why refuse it? The question hung in the air. Lyra thought of the beautiful lie, the vision of freedom, of driving away. Then she thought of the feral wolf attack, of standing back to back with him in this very clearing, of the memory of his love for Anya, not as a threat, but as proof he was capable of something vast and deep. Because she's the one who broke you the first time, Lyra said simply. And making a deal with the thing that broke you feels like losing before we've even started. Caius stared at her as if seeing her for the very first time. Not as a human, or a problem, or a ghost of his past, but as Lyra. The silence stretched, filled only by the soft pulse of the fungi and the distant, mournful wind of the glen. Get some more sleep, he said, his voice unreadable. Dawn comes early, and tomorrow we walk into the mouth of grief. He returned to his place by the fire, but he didn't sit. He remained standing, a sentinel against the dark archway, his gaze fixed on the threshold where their greatest trial awaited. Lyra lay back down, but sleep was impossible. Her mind raced with images of black eyes and seductive lies, and the terrifying truth that tomorrow she would have to walk willingly into the heart of a sorrow so deep it had become a place, and the only thing tethering her to sanity would be the bond to the man whose grief had created it. Dawn in the heartwood was not a sunrise, but a gradual brightening of the blue fungal glow, as if the clearing itself was waking from a long dream. The soft light revealed Caius exactly where he had been all night, standing guard before the archway, his silhouette a cutout against the gloom of the glen beyond. He hadn't slept. Lyra sat up, every muscle protesting. The memory of Morwenna's cold, tempting voice was a sliver of ice in her mind. The bond hummed with a low, steady tension, Caius's focused readiness. "It's time," he said, without turning around. His voice was hoarse from the night's silence. They broke camp with wordless efficiency, the shared rhythm from yesterday returning. He checked her pack again, his movements precise, his gaze avoiding hers. The proximity thrummed through the bond, a mix of his fierce protectiveness and a lingering shame from the vulnerability of shared dreams and the witch's offer. "The glen's illusions are strongest at the threshold," he explained as they stood before the arch of trees. The space between the pines no longer looked like a simple passage. It swirled with gray mist, and the mournful wind song had dropped to a whisper that sounded like pleading. "It will try to separate us. It will show you things that feel more real than I do. You must hold on to one anchor, the bond itself. No matter what it shows you, the bond is a truth it cannot falsify. Feel for me. I will be doing the same." He finally looked at her, his golden eyes blazing in the dim light. "Do not let go." Lyra nodded, her throat too tight for words. She reached for the bond within her, not just as a sensation, but as a lifeline. She found it, a cord of intertwined light and shadow, thrumming with his familiar, stormy presence. Caius reached out, not for her hand, but to grip her forearm, his fingers firm and warm around her sleeve. A point of solid physical contact. "Stay close." Together they stepped through the archway. The change was immediate and violent. The Heartwood's quiet reverence vanished, replaced by a suffocating, dense atmosphere that pressed on Lyra's eardrums. The light was the flat, shadowless gray of a forgotten memory. The ground underfoot was not moss or earth, but a fine, pale ash that whispered with every step. And the trees, they were stone, petrified sentinels frozen in postures of agony, their branches like claws scratching at a bleached sky. This was the shattered glen. It wasn't a forest. It was a cemetery for a moment in time. The pull began instantly, but not from Caius. From the glen itself, a psychic undertow tugging at the seams of her mind, eager to unravel her. "Lyra." A voice sighed, her mother's voice, from a time before bitterness. "Why did you leave me all alone?" She flinched, but Caius's grip on her arm tightened. "Ignore it. It's fishing." They moved forward, ash puffing around their boots. The glen showed them fragments, projected onto the stone trees and hanging in the mist. A younger Caius, smiling down at Anya as they sparred in a sun-dappled meadow, the movement fluid, a deadly dance that ended with laughter. A dinner in the manor, the long table full of pack members, Anya at the head beside Caius, her laughter leading the chorus. The memories were vibrant, joyful. They were not attacks. They were exhibits. "See what was here?" the glen seemed to whisper. "See what was lost? See what you can never be." The pain that radiated from Caius was a quiet, continuous bleed. He kept his eyes forward, his jaw locked, walking through the gallery of his own past as if through a hail of arrows. "It's trying to make you resent me," he gritted out, "or pity me. Either will create a crack." "I don't resent you," Lyra said, and it was true. The memories didn't make her jealous, they made her heartsick for him. "And I stopped pitying you the moment you caught me falling at the creek." He glanced at her, a flicker of surprise in the bond's emotional static. The glen shifted tactics. The ash at their feet began to coalesce, forming shapes, small four-legged shapes that darted between the stone trees. Puppies, wolf pups, made of gray ash, their eyes empty holes. They yipped and tumbled in a silent, grotesque parody of play. Caius's steps faltered. A wave of such devastating, yearning grief slammed through the bond that Lyra stumbled. "We talked about a family," he whispered, the words torn from him. The ash puppies dissolved, The glen fed on that fresh pain, the atmosphere growing heavier, sweeter with decay. A new path opened before them, veering off from the main route through the petrified forest. At its end, lit by a single shaft of that ghostly gray light, stood the ritual stone. It was a massive, flat slab of dark rock, stained a permanent, rusty black at its center. And there, growing from a crack in that very stain, was a flower. The tear of the moon. It was exactly as described, a silver bloom so pale it was almost white, with petals that seemed to hold their own soft light. It was heartbreakingly beautiful, a jewel of sorrow growing from the heart of the wound. But between them and the stone, the glen had conjured its final, most potent illusion. The air shimmered, and Anya stood there. Not as a whisper, not as a ghostly echo, but solid, real, and alive. She wore simple training clothes, her dark hair tied back, a smudge of dirt on her cheek. She looked at Caius, her expression warm and exasperated. "There you are," she said, her voice clear and achingly familiar. "I've been waiting. You're always so dramatic about these pilgrimages." Her eyes, intelligent and kind, then turned to Lyra. Her smile didn't fade, but it grew thoughtful, curious. "And you must be the reason." "Hello, Lyra." Lyra's breath caught. This was different. This wasn't a memory being replayed. This was the glen using all it had consumed, Caius's memories, his love, his guilt, to create a conversation, a negotiation. Caius had gone utterly still, his hand falling from Lyra's arm. He was staring at the illusion, his face a battlefield of agony and longing. "You're not her," he breathed. But the words lacked conviction. "Aren't I?" Anya, the illusion, asked, taking a step closer. She smelled of frost and wildflowers. "I am every piece of me you left here. Every laugh, every touch, every plan we made. I am the love you keep in a locked room in your soul. That's real, Caius. That part is true." She looked at the flower on the stone behind her, then back at him. "You came for the tear, to break this new bond, to keep that room locked forever." She took another step. She was close enough to touch now. "But you have another choice. You could leave the flower. You could let the bond grow. You could move forward." Her gaze was infinitely tender. "I release you, my love. I have been a chain around your heart for too long. Be free." The offer was a masterpiece of cruelty. It used Anya's true, loving nature to deliver the glen's own agenda, to keep them here, to feed on this eternal triangle of regret and nascent feeling. Caius was shaking, tears cutting tracks through the ash dust on his face. The part of him that had died with her was screaming to believe, to grasp at this impossible absolution. Lyra watched, her own heart breaking for him. This was his deepest wound, presented as a healing balm. She knew she couldn't fight this illusion for him. He had to see through it himself, but the glen wasn't done. Anya's form turned fully to Lyra now. The kindness in her eyes deepened into something like compassion. "He will always love me, you know. It will be the defining love of his very long life. You will live in its shadow. Is that enough for you, human? To be the second, quiet love? The consolation prize?" The words struck with pinpoint accuracy, voicing Lyra's own secret, shameful fear. She felt the crack in her resolve, the doubt seeping in. Caius's head snapped toward Lyra. He felt it, her moment of fracture through the bond. He saw the doubt on her face, and in that instant, the illusion of Anya flickered, its features twisting with a hint of Morwenna's triumphant malice. It was the flaw. The glen, in its hunger to hurt Lyra, had overplayed its hand. Caius's golden eyes cleared, the agony hardening into a furious protective resolve. He looked at the beautiful, cruel illusion of his dead mate. "You are a phantom," he said, his voice strong and final, "and you do not speak for her. Anya's love was a fire. It was life. It was not a chain, and it would never begrudge me peace." He turned his back on the illusion, breaking its power. He faced Lyra fully, ash and tears on his face, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that burned away the Glen's whispers. "And you are no one's shadow." He reached out, not for her arm this time, but for her hand, his fingers laced with hers, calloused and warm and utterly real. The bond between them flared, a brilliant, defiant silver light in the gray waste of the Glen. The illusion of Anya shattered with a sound like falling glass. The petrified trees groaned. The Glen, thwarted, began to gather its energy for one last, desperate assault. But they were already moving, hand in hand, sprinting through the dissolving ash towards the ritual stone and the silver flower that promised not just an end, but a choice. The ground turned from ash to hard, cracked earth as they reached the base of the ritual stone. The tear of the moon glowed mere feet above them, a beacon of soft, sorrowful light in the oppressive gray. But the air around the stone itself felt different, thicker, charged with a static that raised the hairs on Lyra's arms. This wasn't just a flower, it was the Glen's heart, crystallized. Caius released her hand, his gaze fixed on the bloom. "It's protected, the final defense. Touching it will trigger a response." What kind of response? The kind that comes from a place that doesn't want to be cured. He scanned the petrified forest around them. The Glen had gone preternaturally still, the whispering wind dead. It was holding its breath. "I'll draw its attention. You climb, pluck it quickly, cleanly at the stem. Do not hesitate." He didn't wait for her agreement. He turned away from the stone, facing the Kong-Kwangda waste, and he let his alpha power roll out of him. It wasn't a subtle pulse of awareness. It was a challenge, a roar of defiance that didn't need sound. Silver light crackled around his form, his eyes blazing like twin suns in the gloom. "Here I am," the power shouted. "The source of your feast. Come and try to keep me." The Glen answered. The petrified trees shuddered. From their stony bark, figures peeled themselves, not full forms, but wraiths of concentrated sorrow, of specific regrets. They were gray and shapeless, but their emotions were sharp as blades, the bitter taste of a promise broken, the hollow ache of a last goodbye left unsaid, the crushing weight of what if. They streamed toward Caius, a tide of despair. He met them, not with physical blows, but with a wall of pure will. He stood his ground, the silver light around him holding back the psychic assault. Lyra could feel the strain through the bond, immense, like holding up a collapsing mountain. He was giving her a window. She scrambled up the side of the ritual stone. The rock was icy cold, the black stain at its center feeling unnervingly like dried blood under her fingers. She reached the top. The tear of the moon grew from the darkest part of the stain. Up close it was even more beautiful and tragic. Dew-like drops clung to its silver petals, looking for all the world like fresh tears. She reached for it. The moment her fingers closed around the slender, cool stem, the world exploded, not outwardly, inwardly. A torrent of emotion that was not her own flooded her system. But it wasn't Caius's grief this time. It was Anya's. The last moments, not from Caius's perspective, but from hers. The confusion as the glamour twisted her sight. The fear as she saw her mate's face on Varek's body. The desperate struggle as she fought what she thought was an imposter. The shocking impact. The cold stone against her cheek. Then, the clarity. The last fleeting second as the spell broke and she saw Caius's true face above her, etched in horror. And the final, overwhelming emotion that eclipsed the pain, the fear, the confusion. Relief. It wasn't forgiveness for him. It was gratitude. Relief that it was him with her at the end, and not the monster. Relief that her last sight was of her beloved. Her love for him, pure and untainted by the tragedy of her death, flooded into Lyra, a sweet, piercing agony. Lyra cried out, the stem still in her hand. The vision was a gift and a violation. She understood now. The tear didn't just grow from sorrow, it grew from love persevering within that sorrow. It was the part of Anya that had refused to be poisoned by bitterness, the part that had died with a smile. This was what Caius had been unable to see, blinded by his own guilt. He thought her last memory was of his betrayal. It wasn't. It was of her love for him. The insight was a shard of light in the darkness, but it came at a cost. Sharing Anya's final moment forged a temporary, terrifying connection. For a heartbeat, Lyra wasn't just holding the flower. She was the conduit for a ghost's last thought. Down below, Caius screamed. He felt it too, through the bond. He experienced Anya's death from her perspective for the first time. He felt her relief, her love. The truth of it was a nuclear blast in his soul, detonating the carefully constructed fortress of his guilt. The wall of his will shattered. The wraiths of sorrow swarmed over him. He fell to his knees, not from their assault, but from the cataclysmic internal shock. The silver light around him guttered and died. "Caius!" Lyra shrieked. The glen, sensing its victory, coalesced its remaining power. The ash rose in a whirlwind, forming into a single massive shape, a towering, amorphous figure with a hollow face, a mouth open in a silent howl of eternal loss. It was the glen's true avatar, grief incarnate. It loomed over the kneeling alpha, a hand of swirling ash and stone reaching down to crush him, to absorb him back into the endless morning. Lyra acted on instinct alone. She had the flower. The plan was to run. But the bond was a wildfire in her chest, and he was her bonded, and he was about to be extinguished. She didn't climb down. She jumped. She landed between Caius and the descending ash giant, the tear of the moon still clutched tightly in one fist. She had no power, no magic, only the raw, screaming connection between her and the broken man behind her. She threw her other hand out, not in a gesture of defense, but of offering. She focused on the shard of Anya's love still glowing within her from touching the tear. She focused on her own fierce, confused, terrifying need for Caius to live. And she focused on the bond, the shared artery, the circuit, the living thing that connected them. She didn't push power into him this time. She pulled, she yanked on the bond with all her will, not to draw his strength, but to draw him, to pull the core of him, his consciousness, his spirit, back from the brink of that consuming grief, back toward the living world, back toward her. The effect was immediate and violent. The ash giant's hand halted inches from her head. Caius gasped as if surfacing from deep water. The glen's avatar focused its hollow gaze on Lyra. It saw the human, the fragile one. It saw the tear in her hand. It saw the bond, now shining visibly as a rope of silver light tethering her to Caius. The bond was the vulnerability. Sever the strand, and both would fall. It changed target. The massive hand swung toward Lyra, but the pull had done its work. Caius's eyes snapped open, cleared of shock, burning with a new, terrifying understanding. He saw Lyra standing defiant before the giant. He saw the flower. He saw the glen's intention. He moved. In a blur of motion that seemed to tear the very fabric of the gray air, he was up. He didn't attack the giant. He tackled Lyra, wrapping his body around hers as the fist of ash and stone slammed down. The impact drove the air from her lungs. They were thrown, a tangled bundle of limbs, skidding across the hard ground. Caius took the brunt, his body a shield. Lyra heard something crack, a rib, maybe his. But they were alive. And in the collision, the tear of the moon was pressed between them, against both their chests. The silver flower erupted with light. A pulse of pure, cleansing energy, born of enduring love, radiated out from them. It was anathema to the glen's stagnant sorrow. The ash giant let out a silent shriek, its form unraveling, dissolving back into the whispering mist. The petrified trees trembled. The psychic pressure lifted just for a moment. Caius rolled off her, clutching his side, his face pale. "The heart would," he choked out. "Run, now!" He tried to stand, staggered. Lyra scrambled up, shoving the glowing tear into her pocket. She slung his arm over her shoulders, ignoring his growl of protest. "Together," she gasped, echoing his word from the memory, "or not at all." They ran, stumbled, half fell their way back toward the archway. The Glen, wounded and furious, rallied behind them. The ground cracked, trying to trip them. The wraiths reformed, wailing. But the light from the tear in Lyra's pocket held them at bay, creating a fragile, moving bubble of safety. They burst through the archway of trees and collapsed onto the soft, blue moss of the heartwood. The moment they crossed the threshold, the howling pursuit ceased, as if a door had been slammed. The mournful wind was once again just a distant sound. They lay side by side, breathing in ragged, painful gulps of the clear, quiet air. After a moment, Lyra fumbled in her pocket and pulled out the tear of the moon. It still glowed, but more softly now, its light steady. They had it. The key to severing the bond. Caius pushed himself up on one elbow, looking from the flower to her face. His expression was unreadable, a storm of too many emotions. He had felt what she felt. He knew what she now knew about Anya's last moment. "You saw," he said, his voice wrecked. "I felt," she corrected softly. He reached out a trembling, bloodied hand not for the flower, but to gently brush a strand of ash-coated hair from her forehead. The touch was feather-light, but it sent a shock through both of them, the bond singing with a complex chord of pain, revelation, and something perilously close to wonder. "You jumped," he whispered, awe and horror mixing in his eyes. "You jumped in front of it." "You would have done the same," she said. And it wasn't a question. He didn't deny it. He just stared at her, his golden eyes searching hers, as if seeing the ghost of his mate's final love reflected in the human who now held his life in her hands. The flower was plucked. The ritual could be performed. The bond could be broken. But as they lay in the Heartwood sanctuary, the unspoken truth hung heavier than the Glen's sorrow. Some things, once truly seen, could never be unseen. And some threads, once pulled taut by sacrifice, might not be meant to be cut at all. The journey back from the Heartwood to the edges of the Whispering Wood was a silent, painful trek. Caius's injuries from the Glen's final attack were severe. Even his accelerated healing was struggling with the deep, bruising impact and the psychic exhaustion. He leaned on Lyra more than he wanted to, his pride a silent, simmering thing in the bond, but his need for support was a stronger, more honest current. The forest seemed less hostile on the return, as if the theft of its heart had drained its energy. Or perhaps the echo of Anya's cleansing love from the tear had left a temporary peace in their wake. The whispers were faint, background static. The blighthounds did not show themselves. Lyra carried the tear of the moon wrapped carefully in a cloth from her pack, its soft silver glow a constant, gentle pressure against her hip. It was no longer just a flower. It was a verdict waiting to be delivered. A verdict on them. They reached the tree line overlooking Frosthaven as the last of the afternoon sun gilded the manor's gray stones. Smoke curled from a chimney. Life, normal pack life, continued. It felt like looking into a world they had left centuries ago. Caius stopped, straightening with obvious effort, his arm leaving her shoulders, the alpha reasserting himself. "Celine will need to see to these wounds," he said, his voice gravelly. "And the tear, it must be prepared. The unbinding ritual is performed at the full moon. That gives us 5 days. 5 days. The sentence hung in the crisp air. "What does the ritual involve?" Lyra asked, her eyes on the distant warm lights of the manor, a ceremony at the old stone circle behind the house. The tear is crushed into a powder, mixed with moon-blessed water and the blood of both bonded parties. It is drunk under the full moon's light. If the moon accepts the offering, the bond severs. Cleanly. He paused. It has never been attempted on a bond with a human. So it might not work. Or it might kill you, he said bluntly, finally looking at her. His golden eyes were haunted, not by Anya's ghost, but by the living woman in front of him. Your system is not designed for this magic. The shock of severance could burn out your mind. Lyra met his gaze. And if we don't try? Then the bond remains. It will likely continue to deepen, to evolve. Your senses will sharpen further. Your lifespan may even adjust to match mine. You will become a permanent part of my world, whether you want to or not. A permanent part of me." He said the last words as if they were a diagnosis of a terminal illness. "You make it sound like a prison sentence." "For me, it has been," he said, the old bitterness surfacing, but it was tired now, worn thin. "A prison of grief and duty. To add another cell. What if it's not a cell?" The question burst from her, fueled by everything she'd seen and felt in the glen. "What if it's a bridge?" "You felt what she felt at the end, Caius. You felt her love, not her accusation. The bond showed you that. This thing you hate, it just gave you back a piece of your soul you thought was lost forever. How can you call that a prison?" He stared at her, his jaw working. The conflict in him was a riptide, pulling her under through their connection. The instinct to flee, to destroy the tether, warred with the dawning, terrifying realization that the tether had become a lifeline, that this human woman had stood between him and annihilation not once, but twice, that she had shown him a truth he'd been too blind, too guilty to see. "I don't know what it is," he admitted, the confession costing him dearly. "And that is the most dangerous thing of all." He turned and began the slow, limping walk down toward Frosthaven. Lyra followed, the weight of the flower and the weight of his words settling on her like a double mantle. Celine's healing room was a place of herbs, steam, and gentle power. She clucked over Caius's wounds, her hands glowing with a soft green light as she pressed them to his ribs. "Bruised, not broken. But the blight venom from the hounds and the grief resonance from the glen have tangled in your energy. It will take a day or two to clear." Her eyes flicked to Lyra, who stood quietly by the door. "And you, child?" "I'm fine. Tired." Celine's wise, kind eyes saw everything. The new closeness, the unresolved tension, the silver glow emanating from Lyra's pack. "You have it." Lyra nodded. Celine finished with Caius and came to her, placing warm hands on either side of her head. She closed her eyes. "Your mind is clearer, stronger. The bond's roots have grown, but they are not choking you. They are—" She frowned, searching for the word, "buttressing you." How curious. Later, in the great hall, Kaelin found them. Caius was by the fireplace, staring into the flames, a glass of amber liquor untouched in his hand. Lyra was at the long table, picking at a plate of stew. Kaelin looked from one to the other, his storm-gray eyes missing nothing. "I take it the mission was a success." "We have the tear," Caius said, not turning, "and the world didn't end." Kaelin leaned against the table near Lyra. "You both look like you fought a mountain and lost, but you're here. That's something." He lowered his voice for Lyra alone. "He let you in, to the glen, and you both came out. That's more than something. That's everything." "He's still set on the unbinding," Lyra murmured. "Of course he is," Kaelin said, not unkindly. "It's the only script he has. The only way he knows to protect someone is to push them away. The problem is," he added, glancing at Caius's rigid back, "I don't think he's reading from that script anymore. I think he's just mouthing the words from memory." The next few days passed in a strange, suspended atmosphere. Lyra was not locked in her room. She moved freely through the manor, a silent, accepted shadow. Pack members she didn't know nodded to her respectfully. A young female shifter brought her extra blankets. The pack was adapting to her presence, to the strange energy of the bond that now felt as much a part of Frosthaven as the stone walls. She spent hours in the library, researching what little there was on fated bonds and unbinding rituals. Most of the texts were in languages she couldn't read, but the diagrams were clear enough. 2 figures, a cord of light between them, a knife severing it. It always looked violent. On the 4th day, she found Caius in the training yard behind the manor. He was moving through a series of martial forms, shirtless despite the cold, testing his healed body. The muscles in his back and shoulders coiled and released with lethal grace. The pale scars from the glen stood out against his skin. He sensed her, finishing the form and turning, chest heaving slightly. Sweat and frost glistened on his skin. He didn't speak, just watched her. "I don't want to die," Lyra said, the words calm in the frozen air. His eyes narrowed. "The ritual." "I'm not talking about the ritual." She took a step closer. "But if the choice is between dying and becoming a permanent part of your world, I need to know what that world is. I've seen the terror and the grief. Show me something else." He was silent for a long moment. Then he tilted his head toward the dense forest that bordered the training ground. "Follow me." He led her not on a path, but through the trees, moving with a predator's quiet confidence. They came to a place where the pines opened up to reveal a small, frozen lake, perfectly circular, its surface a sheet of black ice under the gray sky. On the far side, a hot spring fed into it, creating a plume of steam that rose like a ghost. "This is where the pack comes to run in winter," he said, his voice softer. "The young ones learn to skate on the ice. The elders soak in the springs. On the full moon, when the hunt is done, we gather here." He looked at the lake, seeing a memory. There is laughter here, and peace. It is not all duty and borders and blood. Lyra looked at the serene, beautiful place, a piece of his world that wasn't a weapon or a wound. "Thank you for showing me." He turned to her. The defensive walls were down, just for this moment. His golden eyes held hers, and the bond between them felt wide open, humming with a complexity of feeling she couldn't begin to name. He reached out, slowly, as if moving through deep water. His fingertips, calloused and warm, brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek, tucking it behind her ear. The touch lingered, a point of searing heat in the cold. "Lyra," he began, his voice rough with an emotion that terrified him. A howl cut through the silence, not a pack howl of camaraderie or a hunt, but a sharp, urgent alarm from the western perimeter. Caius's hand dropped. The alpha slammed back into place, his eyes hardening, his head whipping toward the sound. "That's Kalen's patrol! Trouble!" The moment shattered. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by fierce, protective urgency. But as he turned to run back toward the manor, he threw one last look over his shoulder at her, and the bond carried his unspoken thought, clear as a shout. "Stay safe." He shifted as he ran, clothes tearing, his human form dissolving into the massive silver-tipped wolf in a breathtaking surge of power and light. He vanished into the trees, a gray streak heading for the alarm. Lyra stood alone by the frozen lake, her cheek still burning where he had touched her. The tender moment was gone, replaced by the thrill of danger. But this time, she wasn't afraid for him. She was afraid with him, and she knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that she would not wait safely behind. She ran after him, back toward Frosthaven, back toward the howl. The tear of the moon was forgotten in her pocket. The unbinding ritual, 5 days away, felt like someone else's future. Because as she ran, a new howl joined the first from the western woods, deeper, older, and laced with a malice that made her blood freeze. It was a howl she'd never heard before, but Caius recognized it instantly, and his recognition, a spike of pure, historical dread, flashed down the bond to her. The enemy from his past wasn't just a memory. It was at the gates, and the fragile, unraveling thing growing between them was about to face its first true war. What did you think of their journey into the shattered glen? The truth about Anya's death changes everything for Caius. Do you think he should go through with the unbinding ritual now, or has the bond become something worth keeping? Let me know in the comments below. Your thoughts might influence the story. Next time on Under the Crimson Moon. The howl from the western woods belongs to an enemy Caius thought was long dead. A rival alpha, exiled and vengeful, has returned to claim Frosthaven. With Caius's spirit divided by grief and a newfound connection, and Lyra caught in the middle with a bond that is both weapon and vulnerability, the pack faces its greatest threat in decades. The full moon is rising, and with it comes a choice. Sever the bond to fight unencumbered, or embrace it as their only chance to survive the coming storm. Don't miss Episode 3, The Howl of the Exiled. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter in Lyra and Caius' story. Like this video if you're rooting for them to choose the bond. Comment with your prediction. Who is the mysterious enemy howling at their borders? See you in the next episode.